In this episode, we are going to focus on a problem that develops slowly and quietly in cloud environments, often without anyone intending for it to happen. And that problem is privilege creep. Privilege creep occurs when identities gradually accumulate more access than they currently need, usually because responsibilities change, projects end, or temporary permissions are never removed. In fast-moving cloud environments, this creep can happen so gradually that nobody notices until an audit or an incident reveals how broad access has become. Even if you design excellent roles and least privilege policies at the beginning, without ongoing review and cleanup, those designs degrade over time. Preventing privilege creep is therefore not a one-time configuration task, but a continuous governance discipline. By the end of this discussion, you should understand why privilege creep is inevitable without structure, how periodic reviews reduce risk, and how automation can make entitlement cleanup sustainable at scale. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Privilege creep begins in small, seemingly reasonable decisions that accumulate over time. A developer is granted temporary access to production for a release weekend, and that access remains in place long after the release is complete. An analyst is added to an additional role to support a special project and never removed from it once the project concludes. A service account is granted broad permissions during troubleshooting, and those permissions become the new normal. None of these actions are malicious in isolation, but collectively they expand the access footprint of the environment. Beginners often assume that strong initial role design is enough, but roles reflect responsibilities at a point in time, and responsibilities change. Without review, yesterday's appropriate access becomes today's unnecessary risk. The security impact of privilege creep is significant because excess permissions increase both accidental and malicious damage potential. If a compromised identity has more access than necessary, the attacker inherits that excess power immediately. This can turn a minor foothold into an environment-wide incident without requiring additional escalation steps. Even absent an attacker, overprivileged identities can lead to configuration mistakes that affect sensitive systems unintentionally. Privilege creep also weakens monitoring effectiveness because the more an identity is allowed to do, the harder it becomes to distinguish normal from abnormal behavior. Narrow, well-defined roles create clear behavioral patterns, but bloated roles blur those patterns. Preventing creep therefore strengthens both prevention and detection. Periodic access reviews are the foundational governance mechanism that counters privilege creep because they force organizations to re-examine whether current permissions still align with current duties. A review typically involves examining which roles an identity holds, whether those roles match the person's responsibilities, and whether any exceptional permissions should be removed. This is not about questioning trust. It is about validating alignment between access and purpose. Beginners sometimes fear reviews because they seem disruptive, but well-structured reviews are predictable and methodical. When reviews are routine, they become part of operational hygiene rather than emergency cleanup. Regular cadence turns review into maintenance rather than crisis response. Effective access reviews require clear ownership and accountability, because without defined responsibility, reviews become superficial. Each role or entitlement should have a documented owner who understands what it grants and who should have it. Reviewers must have enough context to determine whether access is justified, which means role descriptions and duty mappings must be accurate. Beginners often try to conduct reviews without adequate documentation, leading to confusion and blanket approval of everything. Clear role documentation makes review decisions informed rather than arbitrary. Ownership ensures that no entitlement exists without someone accountable for its continued necessity. Scope matters in access reviews because reviewing everything at once can overwhelm teams and reduce effectiveness. A practical approach is to review high-risk roles more frequently than low-risk ones, focusing first on privileged identities and sensitive environments. Production access, identity modification roles, and cross-account trust relationships deserve particular scrutiny. Lower-risk roles can be reviewed on a longer cadence to balance workload. Beginners sometimes assume that every review must be equally detailed, but prioritization makes governance sustainable. Structured prioritization prevents burnout and improves focus on meaningful risk. Automated entitlement reporting supports effective reviews by providing accurate, up-to-date visibility into who has what access. Manual spreadsheets quickly become outdated and error-prone, especially in dynamic cloud environments. Automated systems can generate current role assignments, highlight changes since the last review, and identify unused permissions. This reduces the cognitive load on reviewers and increases confidence in decisions. Beginners sometimes rely on static reports, which obscure recent changes and make trend analysis difficult. Automation makes entitlement data reliable and reviewable at scale. In addition to periodic reviews, automated entitlement cleanup mechanisms can proactively reduce creep without waiting for scheduled governance cycles. For example, time-bound access grants can expire automatically unless explicitly renewed. Temporary elevation mechanisms can grant short-term privileged access that revokes itself after a defined window. Unused roles can be flagged and removed if they have not been exercised within a specified period. These automated controls reduce reliance on memory and discipline alone. When cleanup is embedded into system design, privilege creep slows naturally rather than accelerating silently. Another valuable control is requiring justification for exceptional permissions and storing that justification in a reviewable format. When someone requests elevated access, documenting the reason and expected duration creates accountability. During subsequent reviews, that justification can be re-examined to determine whether it still applies. Without documentation, reviewers may hesitate to remove access because they lack context. Clear records transform removal from guesswork into informed governance. This practice also reinforces a culture where elevated access is treated as deliberate and temporary rather than casual and permanent. Monitoring identity changes complements reviews by detecting privilege creep as it happens rather than only after scheduled audits. Alerts for new role assignments, expansion of policy scope, or modification of identity trust relationships can prompt immediate validation. This real-time oversight prevents creep from persisting for long periods. Beginners sometimes assume that review cycles alone are sufficient, but between cycles, many changes can occur. Monitoring bridges that gap and ensures governance remains active. Combined with automation, monitoring creates a feedback loop that keeps identity growth in check. Communication and culture also play a significant role in preventing privilege creep because users must understand why access reduction is not punitive. When access is removed after a project ends, it should be framed as routine governance rather than suspicion. Clear explanation of least privilege principles and the risk of accumulated access helps teams view cleanup as protective rather than obstructive. Beginners often encounter resistance when reducing access because users fear losing efficiency. Transparent communication reduces that resistance and supports long-term discipline. Cloud growth and organizational change make privilege creep almost unavoidable unless governance adapts continuously. New services introduce new permissions, acquisitions introduce new teams, and evolving architectures change access needs. Preventing creep requires that review processes evolve alongside these changes. Static governance models cannot keep pace with dynamic environments. By integrating review cadence, automation, monitoring, and clear documentation, organizations create a living identity governance system. This system can adjust as responsibilities shift without sacrificing control. Ultimately, preventing privilege creep with periodic access reviews and automated entitlement cleanup is about preserving the integrity of least privilege over time. Roles that were once minimal and precise can become bloated if left unattended, and bloated roles expand both attacker opportunity and operational risk. Regular reviews realign access with duties, automation reduces manual burden, and monitoring detects expansion early. On the exam, scenarios involving long-term access accumulation often point toward governance mechanisms rather than additional technical controls. In real cloud environments, disciplined review and cleanup transform identity from a growing liability into a controlled, auditable system. When privilege remains aligned with purpose, cloud security remains predictable and defensible even as the organization scales.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.